All right, folks, good afternoon and welcome to the last SocAIety seminar series that we set our journey on late last year. And we started with Karen Howe, the journalist, telling us about data AI, its use, misuse, and we're going to close today with Firth-Butterfield, who's going to tell us about the legal, ethical, practical lens to AI, and especially as it goes on AI governance. It's an absolute delight to host Kay today. She was a barrister in UK, then also a judge, and a fierce human rights advocate. So you can think about with her passion for thinking about international relations, human rights, and humanity in general, with a deep understanding and knowledge of law and what can AI do, etc. It places her in such a unique place, and she was also in the Time 100 list of AI ethics professionals in the world. And she's the CEO of Good Tech Advisory and also the inaugural head of artificial intelligence and member of the executive committee of the World Economic Forum. And as I said, she's a barrister, she's a judge, she's a professor, she's a scholar, she's a scientist, and now she's at Notre Dame. The story is complete. Okay. And then something else from her, you can read her bio for everything, stuff that she has done. But I think something stands out. Back in 2014, when we were not quite talking about AI ethics and it was just coming to be the thing, she was the chief AI ethics officer and she founded the Responsible AI Institute 10 years ago. So she saw it coming, she felt it coming, and put certain things in motion, not even back in the day, to get us thinking about, and was vice chair of IEEE to set up their global initiative for ethics consideration in AI and autonomous system. And as I mentioned, that we had Paolo Benanti, who was advisor to the Pope. She is an advisor to the Lord Chief Justice in the UK. If there's Lord Chief Justice, I'm guessing that has to be the UK, not in the US, from that perspective. And she's on the board, advisory board for ADI, for UNESCO, for International Research Center on AI, AI for All, board of EarthSpecies.com, and now through her firm in Good Ethics Advisory. She's really thinking about, I think something very compelling that came out in a conversation is, and she posed a very interesting question. Imagine the world we want to be in 2050 with AI. The goods that can come out of it. How do we get there? There's a doomsayer scenario often that, oh my goodness, AI is gonna do all this bad, but think about a good world and let's go towards there and what takes us there. So okay, it's a delight and an honor to have you with us today. And so thank you for visiting us.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's a delight and honor to be visiting with you. One of the things that I don't have enough time in my life to do is to do detailed research. And so it's always an absolute pleasure when I get the opportunity to come to a university, especially as prestigious as Notre Dame, and talk to all of you who are doing that in-depth research. And I want to thank Donovan for putting together a schedule where I've met so many people. And I hope that I will take away relationships with many of you for the future. And in this talk today, what I really want to do is ask more questions than answers. And what better place to ask questions than in an academic institution like yours? And we talked about what is our world going to look like in 2050. It is something that I am passionate about because I feel that we can sleepwalk into our world in 2050, or we can actively plan for it. We can think about some policy that will get us there. But before we can think about policy, we have to come to some sort of agreement on what we want 2050 to look like. And although I will be talking about the governance of AI, so you'll all sit there thinking, Kay really hates AI. Please don't think that. I think that it's going to be an amazing tool for humanity, provided we use it responsibly. So let's just start with, as I say, what do we want in 2050? What I think we probably don't want is for AI to have created more divisions in our society and across our world than we have now. And yet, we have, and I know that I spoke to a professor who I'm not sure I can see, who said, I don't like misinformation and disinformation, which was interesting for me. But I'm going to use this term misinformation. We have misinformation largely through AI, which drags us apart. And that's not just nationally, but also internationally. We have geographical issues around data and AI and whose data we're using. And if the people who are really zooming forward with AI are all based in the global north, do we actually have a problem of colonization, recolonization of the global south by those of us who use AI and are gifting in our largesse our models to the global south? And I think that's something that we really need to think about very carefully. Geopolitics and laws doesn't stand for law, it stands for lethal autonomous weapons. Although we have been having this conversation at the United Nations for the last 7 years, we have not finished the lethal autonomous weapons conversation. And as we see AI becoming more and more geopolitical and our world becoming more unstable, it seems to me that's something that we should be talking about and we should be thinking about and coming to some sort of agreement, even if we can't agree everything. And one of the things that you might not know is that actually, when we did a survey at the forum with PwC and we looked at all those principles of AI that come from all over the world, there are over 120, 140, maybe 190 of them. And we looked at them and we found that actually everybody in the world, wherever they are based, agrees on 9 things we should get right with AI. What, of course, we can't do is agree on how we get to getting them right. But that's why you won't hear me use the word ethics at all in this talk. Well, probably won't, because we come across the problem when we talk about this, and I work all around the world. When we talk about ethics, and I'm in China, or I'm in India, or I'm in Africa, and people say, whose ethics are we talking about? And so that's one of the reasons that you'll probably hear me talk about responsible or trustworthy AI, even though those definitions are in themselves problematic. And then I want to talk about smart toys. Smart toys are the toys that we give to our children in the 1 to 7 year range. Now, all of you will, and I actually asked this question, who bought one for their child or their grandchild, and people put their hands up. And then I thought, I'm not going to ask that question again because I'm going to say some worrying things about smart toys. As we all know, in the 0 to 7 age range, we are busy developing our values, beliefs, and attitudes. So this is actually a crucial time. And what we're doing with smart toys is we are giving our children toys that often use facial recognition, definitely use voice recognition. We don't know where the data goes. 95% of them are made in China, so maybe the data goes there. And we don't know, although they're sold as educational toys in many respects, because that actually helps with some of the data storage under CoPRO. What we don't know is what our children are being taught. We don't know whether these courses have been peer reviewed. We don't know anything about it. It doesn't say anything on the box. So one of the things that we did at the forum was to start the Smart Toy Awards, where we actually got people to submit their toys so that we could look at them and we could give them a badge of, this one's okay, parents, you could use that one. But if you extrapolate that, there's all this fuss about TikTok. All this fuss about TikTok. What about our children's data? What about the fact that when we give them these toys, or we think we're going to educate them with AI, we're actually beta testing our kids. Is that what we want to do? As I said, I've got more questions than answers. So now I want to look at data privacy, data paucity, bias and security, but very briefly, because most of you will know these issues. So I'm just going to hit the things that I think that we should be talking about. Data privacy. I'm not going to talk about any of these things apart from the American Data Privacy Act, which has just moved forward a bit, small jump, last week. And so what it does is that it looks very like the GDPR. So if you're not tracking this and you're thinking about data privacy or data or AI, you should be. Data paucity, I think, is a much more interesting thing. So there are about 200 million users of ChatGPT. And we're all talking about LLMs, and isn't it exciting? And things like that. They, according to their own figures, OpenAI have sold 200 to 260 business users. So you might think, okay, so that's quite a big number, but what's hiding behind it are all those users at Microsoft, because anybody who's got a Microsoft computer will know that we're all being given it. And Microsoft has 400 million paying users. So that's 600 million. And what you possibly don't know is of the 200 million, 46% of users are white males living in America. So then let's think about data paucity again. There are about 3 billion people who are not connected to the internet. So 200 million becomes actually quite a small figure, doesn't it? So when we talk about the amazing benefits we will see with AI, unless we connect these 3 billion people, they won't see it at all. And what's more, there are many of us, and I'm looking at all all those lovely young people who are female in my audience, and all of those in my audience who are persons of color. Our data is not as well represented in a large language model as white men from the global south, from the global north. Why? That is a question. We didn't really want to tell you. It's not a sexist statement. It's simply that white guys have had the pen for so much longer. So they've been creating data for so much longer. So what does that mean when you are using your LLM? Does it mean that you are perpetuating? It is giving you answers that perpetuate society that we live in now? Or does it mean that we're able to move forward? I think that's a really important question that we don't address enough. And that's even if you leave the whole of the global south and all those 3 billion people out of the conversation. I just wanted to throw up bias. I'm not going to talk about bias in much detail, but I am just going to tell you, I do a lot of work. I don't tend to talk to academics. I do a lot of work helping businesses to deploy AI responsibly. And these are the things that we talk about with bias, and I'm always open to learning, so I'm hoping we'll have a really rich conversation. These are the sort of things that we talk about when we're talking to companies. Bias data, I just talked about that in some depth. Developers and the biases that come from you, mainly the developers. The need to create diverse teams. So if your developers are all young men, then you need to actually bring together a diverse team around the production of an algorithm. You need to have the C-suite interested. There is absolutely no point in training all the developers and they're not being led by the C-suite. So the CEO has to be on board with responsible AI and it's a whole village of the whole C-suite. The boards tend to not know much about tech, and they don't know much about AI. So the board needs to know about AI and needs to have education urgently. And then there's just education, general education of a company. It's actually quite important because if you educate a company, the workforce of a company, you also educate a percentage of the public, of us who are civilians, citizens, who need to understand how AI works. But also, if you're a company and you educate your people, then they're not going to be as worried that their job might disappear tomorrow. And they're going to be more thoughtful about, if bits of my job disappear tomorrow, how can I make my job better? And how can I change what I do? And that's where innovation comes from. Generated data, again, I don't want to go through all of this, but I do want to talk about deep fakes. I was speaking to the European Central Bank the other day, and I told them the Hong Kong story. A lady in a bank in Hong Kong was asked to cut a check for 25 million. And she said, I can't do that. I need to have a video conference. So she arranged the video conference. Everybody at the video conference, apart from her, was deepfake. It makes it very hard for people in business to know whether, and she knew everybody in that room. It wasn't that these were colleagues who were somewhere else. And so she cut the check for 25 million and sent it to the people who had seen the deepfake. Stuart Russell says, we are not, as humans, evolved enough to be able to not trust our eyes, ears, or other senses. And that's what happened to her. She was in a room where she trusted her senses. So I was telling them ECB about this, and I gave them some tips and tricks about, the things that you can do to identify a deep fake. And then last week came along Basel 1, which, for those of you who haven't seen it, is a much upgraded version of AI changing people's faces and being able to change the way that they present. I also wanted to talk, obviously, about data cannibalism, because to my mind, that's one of the problems that we're going to have with data. Because as we get hallucinated data and more data cannibalism and 46% of white guys using the tools, then we get more and more problems with our data. So let's look at life with AI. Let's look over the horizon. I wanted to talk about medical AI. I could have talked about anything because AI is touching everything. But I thought it'd be good for us to talk about medical because it's something that makes us human. And it's one of those things that I think we should talk about in terms of what do we want in 2060. I had breast cancer last summer. I'm fortunately completely better. But I have an oncologist. So I went to see her a month ago and she said, oh, I'm on this committee for AI and oncology. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could have a chatbot that talked you through your journey with cancer? And I looked at her and I said, no, I don't think it would. I'd really like you, my human oncologist, to talk me through my journey with cancer. And that's possibly a personal preference, but that's how I feel about it. But wouldn't it be fantastic if we could use AI in the background for taking notes and doing all the admin that doctors have to do, which would enable her to give me, the patient, the time that I need to be talked through that journey. And yet on the other side of that, I know that one of the problems that she has is talking to people who don't speak English because she doesn't speak another language. And so in that case, maybe an AI to help with that journey would be great, but doesn't that doesn't sound as if it's equitable healthcare. So as I say, more questions than answers. One of the answers that I do have is that NVIDIA and some others have just announced that they are going to produce something called Nurse AI. And Nurse AI will be available at $9 an hour. So one of the things that we talk about a lot, and I was in Princeton talking with economists at the weekend, what does that do to the labour market for human nurses? In one case, you could say there aren't enough human nurses, and so therefore we need AI nurses. And in the other case, you could say it's going to depress the market for human nurses because you have to pay human nurses more than $9 an hour. And then I come to elder care. I think that as we grow older, we are going to be more cared for by AI. And so that will possibly be robotics once we've got further with robotics. But we're already seeing in Japan a lot of elder care being helped by artificial intelligence. And I think that's another thing that we need to be talking about as to where do we want to be in 2050. How much care do we want from robots or AI, vis-a-vis how much care do we want from people? And then I'll come to my ER story. So I was talking to a bunch of CEOs of hospitals, and they said to me, how do I stop my ER doctor checking his diagnosis or her diagnosis on ChatGPT? And if I can't, am I liable? First of all, you might want to have a policy about use of ChatGPT by your ER doctors, but yes, you are liable. And so there are a number of issues, and I haven't got time to talk about all of them in healthcare, but there are a number of issues that we need to be thinking about. And so I wanted to then dive down a little bit from healthcare to healthcare and the economy, because we've got the nursing, the nurse AI, we've got the elder care, and what the statistics show us is that we are coffin-shaped in America and in Europe and in Japan and other societies around the world, China, Korea. We are coffin-shaped populations. So we've got a lot of old people being held up by not so many young people. That means that we actually don't have enough human carers for our older people. So that means that we have a conversation to be had, which I just told you. Do we want to be cared for by humans, or do we want to be cared for by AI? If we don't want to be cared for by humans, then the only answer is immigration. Sorry, if we don't want to be cared for by AI, then the only answer is immigration. And so these are some of the big things that we need to struggle with and think about policies for. Flying the Starship. I was talking to some graduate students and PhD students earlier, and I said, in Star Trek or Star Wars, do people fly the plane? Or does the AI fly the plane? In our sci-fi fantasies, do we do things as humans, or does the AI do it? Does the human in Star Trek or Star Wars or any of the others that one could name fire, give the order to fire, or does the AI give the order to fire? I think you'll find that it's humans. And one of my postgraduates confessed to not having seen Star Wars or Star Trek, and so therefore couldn't answer that question at all. But this is back to what world do we want? Do we want to fly the starship, or do we want AI to fly the starship? And so I'm a lawyer, and Morgan Stanley just released a report saying that AI could automate 44% of all lawyers' tasks. Does that thing about kill all the lawyers? So I don't see you all crying about this. But I do think But there will still be work for lawyers because there's a lot of problems that we are going to have to solve, and much of that will be solved through the courts. But it's a wider issue, isn't it? It's Goldman Sachs released a survey just recently that said 44%, sorry, 2/3 of all financial analysts working for them, they won't be needing anymore. So again, if we think about this as an economic issue, these are highly paid people. These are people who have gardeners and employ folks to do things for them. These are people who buy big houses, pay big mortgages. If we take them out of the market, what happens to our economy? And I can tell you that I think it's one more trillion. But economists will say to us that AI doesn't take away jobs, it only takes away bits of jobs. But if you take away bits of jobs, and then you give the other bits, which are now less, to less people, you still have people who are losing their jobs. And one of the challenges that I think we have now is how do we organize our societies so if people are losing their jobs, before they can find others or before they can retrain, what's going to happen to those people? We used to think it was truck drivers that would be unemployed because of AI. It's not going to be truck drivers, it's going to be us, the white collar workers. And I think that brings me to the effects of not enforcing copyright law. I think if we don't enforce copyright law, more people will find that they are out of work. Now, Hal Varian is the chief economist of Google. And on Saturday, he said these things at Princeton. YouTube enables everybody to learn. AI displaces tasks, not jobs. I've talked about that. And I've talked about the effect of the trickle-down effect of high-paid labor being lost. But how many of you agree that YouTube is a good education for your new career when you've lost the one you've got? So
No one.
it depends what you want to do. I guess if you're not going to lose your job if you're a plumber, because we haven't got robots that are good enough at the moment. But I think it's hard to suggest that everybody who showed that we could all learn all sorts of mathematical skills. There are people who can't do math in the world. And I don't think however much you watch YouTube, you're going to be able to. And so I have some real problems with the way that economists are thinking about this. Take another example, the people who are paid practically nothing to moderate content living in Africa don't have to do that job, they could get another one. Again, I don't know what other job they might get. So let me go back, if I can, to grey mush. And I think that this picture is particularly good because I use Designer in PowerPoint for these slides. And this is what it came up with to illustrate grey mush. I think one could say either the AI is not good enough yet, or that's a problem because now it thinks that grey mush is buildings. So let me extrapolate this a bit. Generation AI essays, sorry, not generations, generative AI essays. Everybody's using generative AI to write their essays. What we know is that generative AI enables the poorer student to get to the middle ground. It doesn't seem to have any effect on the middle ground student getting higher. Now, that might just be that it's not good enough yet, or there may be some other problem going on. Microsoft has just updated my computer and it says it can now write my social media posts as well as my emails and everything else for me. Do I think that's a good idea? You probably realize by now that I don't. Why don't I think it's a good idea? Because I don't think that we want everybody to be left in the middle. I don't think we all want to sound the same in our social media posts, and I don't think we all want to sound the same in our essays. And that's what I mean by grey mush. It's something in the middle. But it doesn't, to my mind, take humanity a long way forward. And that's another question that we need to be considering in 2050, because it does help the people who can't to the middle, which may mean that they can get more jobs. Years ago, 2016, I taught a class at the University of Texas Law School, and I posed this question. If Google bought an island and declared itself a country, what would be the legal? In those days, we thought that Google was at that stage the biggest of the tech companies. And there were things like international law that were actually working. We don't see that now. And so it was a thought experiment. But what I want to do is a new thought experiment with you. And this came from the New York Times just yesterday. And I will have to read the figure because I can't remember them off the top of my head. What they were positing is that in order to be a generative AI company, you need so much money that actually you can't be. The big five have effectively eaten up all the competition in the LLMs, in the generative AI space. So Inflection AI, the investment was 1.5 billion. They had no income from it, and they are now absorbed into Microsoft. Stability is unstable, I should say, especially because of the lawsuit against it, or a number of lawsuits against it for copyright issues. Has approximately there's approximately $1.8 billion between the sales and the cost. Amazon between them have put in 7 billion. OpenAI charges $20 a month. It's said that they have a revenue of 1.6 billion, but I'm not sure where from. Microsoft reports 1 billion in sales from AI, but paid 16 million plus Azure for a stake in Mistral, which is the French generative AI model, for those of you who don't know, and invested 13 billion in OpenAI. Meta's spending 10 billion just this year. And Zook says that he knows that he won't get a return for a number of years. These are huge numbers. And Sam is in Dubai and Saudi, looking for 7 trillion to move forward. What's happening here is that as these small generative AI companies spin up, they're being absorbed by the companies that can afford to play the waiting game. Now, this is great if you're a small generative AI startup. Maybe we should all dash out and start new companies. But there is the investor fatigue because they're not seeing any money back. What does that mean for our economy and how we create models and how we create our work as we go forward? And it felt to me as if probably they've gone beyond needing an island now. AI for all. I thought by now you'd be fairly fed up with me worrying about AI. So I thought I'd talk about some good uses of AI. And wildfires. When I was at the forum, we did some work with Turkey on predicting where a wildfire would occur before it occurred. And so obviously if you can do that, and you stop the wildfire before it starts. And that's, to me, a great use of AI. The last two, I think, have more responsible issues around them, and then it'd be interesting to hear what you think. We worked with Rwanda, and Rwanda has one doctor for 27,000 people. Okay, so the work was to create a chatbot that could triage calls so that the one doctor could concentrate on the things that needed doing. And so the idea was that the chatbot would be able to say, take a paracetamol or acetaminophen, or go to the ER, or I'll come and visit you in 4 days' time. What we found was we couldn't make it sufficiently robust where we couldn't guarantee that people would be given the wrong advice. However, that brings us to this interesting question of how good does an AI have to be? So people are going to die in Rwanda anyway from lack of healthcare. Did it matter that we couldn't get it to 100% success rate? Because people were going to die anyway. Or is it important for us to make sure that our technology is 100% good? So as I say, I think that presents some questions that we should be asking ourselves, particularly as we think about care in the global south, so that we don't find ourselves saying, oh, if you live in the global north and you've got money, you can have a human doctor, but if you live in the global south, you can have this bot. But maybe the bot's better. And then there's the question of banking the unbanked. So I sit on the board of a company that's a conglomerate in the Far East. And there's an AI division. And one of the things that we want to do is to help our bank the unbanked. That's a great thing, absolutely a great thing. But to do what we have to do is we have to correlate the data from people who are spending money at our petrol stations or our grocery stores and in other ways, so that we can build a financial profile for them, because they can't get a financial profile in the normal way. And many of these are women. That's against almost every GDPR rule I can think of. So again, at what point do we draw these difficult responsible AI divisions? Yes, it's all right if you are trying to do good, and no, it's not if you don't have that need. But then again, does that mean that I can play with the privacy of people in this country, but I can't play with the privacy of... I just want to remind you, and I'm going to go very quickly through these two slides, of the motivations of many of the people in Silicon Valley. And I want to do that simply because there are some motivations, simply because I have to talk about Mark Andreessen and the Tech Optimists Manifesto, which he loathes people like me. But what do citizens think? And so people who aren't billionaires in Silicon Valley. Well, this is what Americans thought about in November of last year. They were quite worried about AI, and it's an Axios poll, an APP, that's the Psychologist Association, a Gallup survey, and a new government survey. So they were quite worried about it. And then, I think a month ago, Edelman did their 2024 trust barometer. And we see there are even more problems. And there's with 32,000 people, not in America, around the world. And they all had, the trust in AI had dropped through the round. And the global technology chair of Edelman said, and I have to read this because it warms the cockles of my heart, those who prioritize responsible AI, who transparently partner with communities and governments, and who put control back in the hands of the users, will not only lead the industry, but will rebuild the bridge of trust that technology has somewhere lost along the way. And when I was at Davos this year, I was on a panel with the CEO of Accenture, North America, and he said one of the things that they're busiest doing at the moment is taking apart deployments of AI so that they can rebuild them with trustworthy AI underpinning them. That brings me to regulation. Global regulation, China, Brazil, and India. Let me just deal with those. China has a lot of regulation around AI, but the regulation addresses the interaction between business and customer, as opposed to the interaction between government and citizen. Brazil is about to pass a law on AI that looks a bit like the European Union's law. And India, just about 3 weeks ago, issued an order that said the government wanted to look at all algorithms. I don't think they mean that. And I think that we will have to see where they go with that. The UN Secretary General has a high-level panel on AI. There is about to be a treaty out of the Council of Europe on AI. And to get a treaty, you have to have all the people who are members vote in favor. And the OECD obviously has been doing some great work for a long time. In the US, for a long time, we were behind. The Europeans were talking about regulation and we weren't. But what we do have now is the Biden executive order from November. And just today, NIST issued an amendment to their framework to cover generative AI. It's open for comment. So any of you who want to comment on it, please go and read it and do it. It's not very long. I think it's only 79 pages. Also, don't forget that there exists regulators already. So you'll see that the EEOC, the Department of Justice for the Civil Rights Department, the FTC, and one other that escapes me at the moment, have all come out and said, we don't mind if you use AI to break the law, or whether you use a human to break the law, we'll sue you anyway. So to put that into context with the EEOC, they're effectively saying, if you use AI in a hiring setting, and it discriminates, we will sue you. If you use AI, if you use a human who discriminates in a hiring setting, we'll sue you as well. The question for us lawyers is, what happens beyond that? If I'm the company who bought the AI system, can I sue the people who created the AI system and on up the chain? What Microsoft and Google have both said is, if you are sued using one of their models for copyright, for copyright infractions, then they will underwrite the costs of your case. So that may or may not make you all feel much happier. Canada is a great example of the way that the law is developing. So Air Canada paid someone to create a chatbot. They put it on their website. It gave false information, and then the buyer lost out and went to court. And then Air Canada said, nothing to do with us. Yeah, it was on our website, and we own the website, but we didn't design the chatbot. As you can imagine, the court didn't agree. And then that brings me to the EU AI Act. The EU AI Act is the most substantial legislation that we have at the moment. If any of you are interested in what the future looks like in governance, this is a document you should read, but this is well over 200 pages. And given that you don't fancy 79, I'm not sure how keen you're going to be on the EU. There are lots of good summaries on the internet, mainly from lawyers. Is it going to be a role model for the world like GDPR? Possibly. possibly. And the fact that we're seeing some of the things like the American Data Privacy Act coming up suggests that maybe more likely than not, what they do, if you don't know about it, is that they categorize risk. Social credit scoring is a high risk. You're not allowed to do it, an unacceptable risk, and you're not allowed to do it. And then there's various categories beyond that. And I'm not going to talk at length about this because otherwise we'll be here until tomorrow. I wanted to go back to deep fakes simply because there is work being done, and I spoke to a wonderful professor yesterday who is doing wonderful work on fakes. In industry, there is the Adobe-led Content Authenticity Initiative, which actually marks so that you can see the history of an image. And just because they're great things happening here. In Australia, they have just recently actually successfully prosecuted somebody for deepfake revenge porn. And the UK passed the Online Harms Act, which tries to address digital harms to children. It's not good enough, and they're already talking about changing it, but at least it's a start. So what world do we want with AI? I started there. I think there are some issues around sustainability and AI in terms of water and in terms of electricity. And we had conversations about that over lunch. And Karen, who spoke first in this seminar series, has done seminal work on that. There's the internet access issue that I spoke about at the beginning, the widening tensions geopolitically, the increasing power of big tech, misinformation and democracy. And I ask you, what world do you want for your future? Thank you.